Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Breaking into Tech community's first live AMA. Today we have Mike Chen, a self-taught software engineer. Mike, do you mind introducing yourself and describing your background for anyone that doesn't know?
Yeah, sure. So how far back do you want me to go? Or do you want me to keep it to the short and sweet?
Let's start with the short and sweet because my next
Okay.
question will allow you to dig in.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, so I am the CTO and co-founder of a company called Motivo. The company does basically matches pre-licensed therapists to supervisors, and the goal of the company and the mission is to increase access to mental health resources.
The next question comes from our community, and this is where you get to dig in more into your background. How did you start your self-taught journey? What is the first thing that you did in software?
Yeah, so I started my self-taught journey back in 2009. And I always try to make it very clear that like the journey back then was very different from the journey today. So the way that I kind of preface this is I believe that it's much harder to land a job today than it was back when I started. But it was much easy. It's much easier to learn than it was when I did. No boot camps, no like online courses. There were a couple YouTube channels like some OGs like the new Boston. I don't know if people even like know what that is these days. But there were a couple of like YouTube channels that I frequented, but the majority of my learning came through books. And so I bought a bunch of books back in the day. Went to the library, borrowed some books. I was really like my first language was Java. Like my first like official language was Java. And if you go even further back, I tried C++ back in seventh grade, and I kind of gave up on programming for a long time after that, just because it was so overwhelming. And so that's something I tell people too is like maybe sometimes the timing is just not right. And I tried it again like 12 years later, and it really took to it. So um, if I were to go, like kind of into my motivation for wanting to learn how to code, it was I was like really unhappy with my job path. I studied biochemistry, and I left school wanting to go pre med, I did pre med, and I left school wanting to become a doctor. And I worked at a hospital for a bit doing clinical research, and I realized that it wasn't for me. Like I just wasn't interested enough in doing that. And my boss even noticed, like I tried to be a good employee, but like my boss noticed that, like, oh, there was all these like conferences that you could go to for free, and you're not taking advantage of any of them. And he wasn't like doing it as a criticism, but he was just like noticing that it didn't seem to be the path that I wanted to go down. And so I then pivoted into like biotech research, and I also hated that. I realized that like I would need to go back to school to get a PhD in order to do anything meaningful, and I was just like basically pipetting stuff from one like a bottle to into like a plate, and just doing that over and over again every single day. It was like the most like mind-numbing work, and unless I wanted to go back to school, that's like what I was going to be stuck doing. So yeah, I started borrowing some books and like making the transition. I got an unpaid internship, and then it took me like 11 uh, months. I can't remember like the exact month that I started. I think it was like 11 to 13 months, was somewhere in that range before I landed my first job. So I'll pause there. That was a long-winded story.
Well, how did you even come across software engineering in the first place? You said that it was seventh grade when you first played with the language. Did you have someone in your life that was a software engineer, or did you see something that made you think, oh, that's kind of cool?
Yeah, great question. No, I didn't. I like didn't. I kind of like wandered into it. It wasn't like the hot field it is today. Like there was like the whole dot-com boom and bust, and then the early 2000s happened, and Google went IPO and all that stuff. But I would say it was still not like known that it would be the crazy hot field that it is today. Back then, I was really worried that there was a lot of outsourcing happening, and people were worried that the wages would continue to be driven down. And so I really went into it out of an interest, like a genuine interest in programming. And like you said, I was interested back a long time ago. My interest actually started even before that when I got my first computer in fourth grade. and I started playing around with Basic and and really kind of very old school languages like MS DOS kind of stuff. And then in seventh grade, I had my brush with C++. And then when I revisited it in 2009, it was actually a TED talk that really piqued my interest in programming. It was by a professor named Clay Shirky, who talked about cognitive surplus and how tech can really be used as a force of good in the world. And so I was really enamored by this concept. Basically, these like two American software engineers built this app for to do some good in the Kenyan election riots back around that time, and I was really kind of drawn into that, like this idea that I could use some of my free time to like essentially volunteer and do something meaningful for other people in the world. So I love that idea, and I also it's still available. If you look up cognitive surplus, Clay Shirky, you should be able to find it. It's an excellent TED talk, and I think it's like relatively timeless. So yeah, I also realized like in many ways it was kind of the opposite of what I was doing as a biotech researcher, where um, as a biotech researcher, like you need these like several $100,000 pieces of equipment to do anything. And like I heard from one of my coworkers about this person who was like a specialist in this machine, like this like $500,000 machine, and they got laid off, and they had to move like 3 states away to find another job because that was like the nearest company that had a machine like that. And that's so different from software engineering. All you need is like a chair and a computer, and like you can create something out of nothing. And I found that so magical, and I still find it like I still like the magic is not lost on me even today. So that's again a long-winded way of describing my falling in love with software.
I think that's amazing. It seems like your values are still around today, considering, the company that you founded, how you're really just trying to make something good out of
Yeah,
software. Um,
yeah.
the next question would be, when did you feel like you had enough experience to apply for like a paid position or a salary job after your unpaid internship?
Yeah. Again, I want to preface that my experience is very different. Um, I I built like two projects essentially, and I had enough Java and like object oriented programming and like design patterns experience that I felt that I was comfortable applying to jobs. Um, and I applied before I thought I was ready, which is something I always tell people to do. Is you're not going to be ready, you're not going to know what you need to do your first job effectively. You're just not going to. You're going to learn so much at your first job. So I always tell people to do that same thing. Is just like, you have some sense that you're ready, um, but you're not going to be, and like it's okay. So I didn't really have like a threshold. Like it was a little opportunistic. I basically heard about a couple of opportunities. My friend had started working for a startup, and the startup in the same office space was also looking for a developer, and so I applied to that job, and that was the one that I got. I applied to a couple other jobs at the same time, but it was really because my friend had this opportunity. I was like, oh, we could work close to one another. He was also breaking into software, and he got this job at this company, and I was like, that sounds like it'd be fun to kind of like develop in our journey together. And so that was kind of the timing. It wasn't like I was doing something that I made me feel like I was ready. It was really that the timing worked out, and I'm really glad I did it. But again, I think like people need to be a lot more intentional today about applying to lots of places. But my advice is still the same, that you should do it before you think you're ready.
I feel like that's a really common sentiment, is that usually it's connections that help you land a position because there's just so many applicants, especially today.
Yeah.
Is that the same for your future positions? Did you know somebody before you got into your next job after that?
Yeah, I got a referral for my second job, and then every other job after that was someone reaching out to me on LinkedIn. So I think like once you get to a certain point in your career, it becomes less of a concern that you'll need to like. I think if you're wanting to break into like your dream job, I think referrals are still important, but the actual like quantity of jobs is you can generally break into it with whatever experience you have after you get to a certain point.
And I know that you mentioned that during your self-study journey, it was before there were so many resources available online that you mainly learned from books. I personally can't imagine like not having the tools that we have today while learning.
Yeah.
What would you say was the most challenging aspect of that, learning
Yeah,
how to
it's
code?
yeah, it's like the execution. Like so much of learning to code is doing, right? And so that was something that was I had to be really intentional about. You can't get a course like you could get a course today that talks you through a project and kind of holds your hand as you go through it, which I think like is good and bad, right? Because sometimes it can create the illusion that like I'm learning something really well, and so I didn't really have to deal with that like tutorial hell. I didn't have to deal with that kind of challenge. But I did have to be really intentional about creating products with what or like projects with what I was learning. And so I mentioned two projects that I worked on. So one was a flashcard app. So my partner at the time, she was studying for her GREs, and so I created a little flashcard app for her to study and to make that process a little bit easier for her. She ended up using it for like a couple days, but it was still like a really valuable experience for me to build it. And so I was really glad to have that like real world use case. Another real world use case I had was I made like a tiny website that would um, query for commute times for like we were apartment hunting, and so I could put in an address and it would query like I can't remember which Maps API it was back then, like but it would query that API and show me the commute times to that job for every apartment I was looking at. I would like set it up to do that in a grid, and so I presented those at my first interview, but they also helped me kind of learn what I need to learn.
What did you do when you ran into a problem and you couldn't find a tutorial or the answer easily?
Yeah, I mean, you just had to struggle through it. There was still Google and there was still like Stack Overflow. There were still like some technical articles, but nowhere near the level of like that you can see today. Like you can Google most problems these days and most error messages. They get a lot of meaningful hits. So there's a lot more struggling through it back then, and kind of like making sure to read the error messages really well. But I also think that like the complexity of the issues that I faced was a lot smaller back then too. So I constantly, kind of pros and cons. The complexity of the like, if I run into an issue with something's like not rendering properly in React, it's probably like some line deep in like this 40,000 line React file that like I need to debug. That I really need someone from Stack Overflow to tell me exactly what's going on. But with back then it was like jQuery, and it was just like everything is like pretty on the surface, like it's a pretty low level of abstraction of what's going on in the DOM. It was much easier for me to kind of decode what the error messages were.
Did you ever struggle with imposter syndrome as a self-taught developer?
Oh, I don't know anyone who has not struggled with imposter syndrome. Like, if you're not struggling with imposter syndrome, you're probably an imposter. So I say that a lot. Is like you're probably trying to do people into thinking that you're someone that you're not. So of course, like at my first job, I tell the story a lot of how little I knew going to my first job. Like I will constantly talk about this where get your first job. Like just get your first job. It will make your self-learning look like a joke. Even if you've done a lot of self-learning before, which I thought I did. I was like, I thought I'd done a lot of self-learning and that I knew what I needed to know. The breadth of the issues that you face and the complexity of the systems that you're working with and the needs of the stakeholders are all things that you don't get as part of your self-learning journey. And it's not to denigrate your self-learning journey. It's really important to be able to do that to land your job, but when you get to your first job, you're gonna be overwhelmed. There's almost no way around it. And if that is the sign that you're growing, and that you should kind of lean into that and like really see what it is that you need to learn. So listen to that imposter syndrome. Don't let it overwhelm you. But it usually means that yeah, you need to learn and grow. And like I still deal with imposter syndrome today. It never quite goes away. There's still like Even with 11 years of or going on 12 years of experience, there's still so much I don't know about software, and that honestly I'm never going to learn. And even like even if you narrow it down to just a slice of web development of like all the new frameworks that I haven't even touched. Like I have like very little Vue experience or like very little Svelte experience, and like there's a new React framework called Remix, and like I have not touched any of them. Like I barely touched any of them because I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I want to like learn what the pros and cons are, but I don't know them that well, and like I don't need to know them for my job. So it's just like, you know, narrow down the scope of what you need to learn and use that to guide your next steps, and let that imposter syndrome fuel you to do that, but don't let it like suffocate you.
I noticed in your LinkedIn history that you went from holding the title front-end software developer to UX engineer to creative engineer to senior software developer. Were these positions like drastically different? Do you feel like that you're more well-rounded from exploring different software-related roles?
Yeah, I do. Like I really appreciated that I was a full stack engineer for my first job. It gave me a lot of the sorry, I by the way, I don't recommend that people go into full stack engineer as their first job today. And that's because like I said, the level of complexity of each side of the stack has changed so much, right? Like just learning React by itself, or a framework like React, like Angular, Vue, Svelte, is a full job in itself. And back then that wasn't true. Like you could make a career out of like being a full stack engineer because the level of complexity, like I said, is so different. And HTML and CSS, and like you could have a job just like doing HTML and CSS, and like a little bit of JavaScript, which I don't think you could do today. Like I don't think people are hiring for that today. Like maybe I think that I've heard of some doing that, like the front of the stack, but you have to be like a little bit yeah, like the breadth of what people were looking back for back then was so different for what it is now.
That's really
Um,
interesting for in my perspective because it feels like as someone trying to break into tech that you just need to know everything before
yeah,
you get
that's
hired.
no, that's not true. And I think like that's something that is really important for people to kind of internalize is like, um, how much you need to know to get your first job. It's like however much a company needs you to know. It's like it's not there's no like set answer for that. And yeah, like the only way to find out is by applying and trying. But going back to your question about like breadth and like I'm really glad that my first job was full stack, which back then was all the entire stack. So we had a PHP backend, we had MySQL database, we managed all our servers in a co-location center. There was no AWS or like Heroku, or like it wasn't big back then. And so as part of my first job, I went to the co-location center to change out a RAID drive. Like I went and plugged in, there was like a crash cart with a monitor on it. I went and plugged it into the server. And that was part of my job. And also like doing the front end was also part of my job. So I benefited so much from like exploring all sides of the stack. And what I think that did throughout the course of my career was it's a lot easier to learn something new when you have like kind of anchor points to your own knowledge, where you can basically apply that new knowledge that you're hearing about from another engineer in your team. You can be like, oh, that's kind of like this concept that I have, and that allows you to kind of absorb this knowledge, even if you're not actually working on it actively. It allows you to absorb that knowledge and to really come back to it later if that's something you're interested in. And so, like my knowledge of like database design has grown over the course of my career, even though was only doing it actively for the first like 2 or 3 years of my job or my career. And now I'm coming back to it as CTO, and like I have this breadth of knowledge of and like years of experience that I built up, like kind of listening to people talk about it, even though I wasn't actually doing it. So I would say like get a job and expand that breadth as soon as you can. Um, and it's going to be really valuable, like, and it give you a lot of options as you kind of go forward. But to answer your direct question, Aiden, about like kind of my different job titles, a lot of them were basically like synonymous with what you call a front end engineer. So just like doing HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Going further into your journey, what inspired you to go on a path to become CTO and found your own company?
Yeah. So just as a disclaimer, I actually became co-founder like 4 years into this company's history. This company actually started in 2017, and so I took a bit of an unusual path to become co-founder. And so what co-founder means in my situation is like I'm deeply invested in the company and I'm here for the long run. So just want to be just offer that disclaimer about like what my job title looks like. But I always knew that I'd be back in startups eventually. Like I really wanted to go to Google. I feel like it's every developer's dream to go to Google. And when I was just starting out, I was like I couldn't picture how I would get there. But I kind of took this like stair stepping approach of like going to like larger and larger startups, and then going to like a I guess the equivalent of a FAANG company today, which was Yahoo, which I think was in the middle of a decline, but like it looked like it might have turned it around, but at the time it just ended up didn't not turning it around. But at the time, it was still like reputable. It was still reputable to work there, and I was able to land a job there, and then eventually get noticed by Google. So I did the big company thing for a couple of years, and I thought it was okay. Like I basically didn't love it. There was a lot of like kind of bureaucracy around making like you feel like a cog. You feel like a cog in the wheel, and you're not making a huge impact. There there are a lot of engineers kind of dedicated to like improving these big companies like search revenue by 0.1%. That's like a good quarter for them. And it's just like that, people are into that stuff. It's not really something that I did, like I was hoping to be there for a long time, kind of in the big company world. But it just wasn't a good fit for me. And I think that's a really important question to be asking yourself during your entire career is like, what is the best fit for you? What are you hoping to like? What kind of engineer are you hoping to become? What interests you about the actual work? Um, is it like salary? Is it impact? Is it like doing good in the world? And so those are the questions I was asking myself when I left Airbnb back in 2020. Um, and I didn't know what I was going to do after that. I was actually thinking of consulting for a bit, and that's actually what I started as my company Motivo at was as a consultant. I was planning on only being there for just a very short time. And then it ended up really falling in love with the mission of the company, and decided to stay on as CTO. And then had a lot of conversations with my founder about what kind of company she was building and how we wanted to treat our employees, what kind of impact we wanted to have in the world. And I decided to stick around, and now I'm here for the long term. So, yeah, I'm happy to answer any of the questions about any of that.
That's interesting. I've definitely seen a shift in how people view FANG companies and people that work at them. Because it used to be like the big thing. That's what you wanted to get into as a FANG company that makes you look like the best developer, right? Um, but now I'm seeing people question if you have worked at a FANG company, why? Why did
Yeah,
you decide to do
yeah,
that?
yeah. It's interesting. Like I have seen that shift too. I have no regrets about working for Google or Airbnb. I feel like I would actually recommend it anyone if you like even having the experience I had and like knowing what I know now about like my own interests, I would have done it again, and I would recommend that everyone do it because it like I really believe in like optionality, keeping your options open, and having one of these big names on your resume does that for you. It just like gives you credibility. For better or for worse. And like that's how kind of the tech industry operates, and that's kind of how the world works, unfortunately. But so I would never dissuade anyone from doing it. Even if I had gone back in time today and told myself back then, hey, it's not all it's cracked up to be, I still would have had to go and see for myself. And there's a lot of really like I learned from being there. I learned from a lot of like good engineering practices from especially being at Google, just like excellent engineering. They have a really good engineering culture, and I took a lot away from that, and I don't regret doing it. I would recommend that anyone who can should at least try it and see if they like it. So I have coworkers who are still there from my time there. I went there in 2013. They're still there, so they clearly love it, and it's clearly a good fit for some people.
Continuing on talking about your experience as a CTO, do you have any advice on how you hone in on the confidence to believe in yourself and the product you're putting out?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I have a lot of imposter syndrome as a CTO, because now I literally don't have anyone to ask questions to. Like there used to be the case that like, oh, if I didn't know something, I could find someone at the company who maybe knows what the answer to a question. And I think like with the CTO role, there's also a lot more responsibility of like this is an organization I'm trying to build. It's not just like this is a product I'm trying to build. Like I am responsible for these people's career, and like I'm responsible for how the entire company thinks about like career building for people like under my care. And so there's a lot of questions I have around like, am I doing this right? And I have such a narrow perspective from like I've worked at a couple startups and a couple big tech companies, and that's it. And that's the only perspective I have on like how to run a company. And I don't even know that I've learned a lot about like how to how to run a company in a healthy way. And so I have to do a lot of research on my own. Have to talk to a lot of other tech leaders, and that's how I like have that's how I drive confidence in myself is doing a lot of research and like and trying to learn a lot from other people. Um, so I don't know. That's a great answer to that question. It's hard. Like I have to say it's hard, and I doubt myself a lot, and I never know if I'm doing the right thing. And that's kind of a feeling I've settled into, and like just doing my best and trying to like maybe that's I this I'm sure this has a lot of analogies to like how I felt when I was first starting out.
Do you have any attributes that you look for in like bringing on a software engineer as a teammate for Motivo?
Yeah. I think from a junior developer's perspective, I think it's really important for them to care. Like I think like that's something that I talk about pretty abstractly, but like you cannot train someone to care about something that they don't care about. There's no amount of training that you can provide to make them care. And what I'm talking about with caring is like, do they want to get better? Do they want to get more efficient and like get faster at what they do? Do they care about like the company's mission? And this is an interesting question because like I don't always think it's that important for people to care about the company's mission. Like to be quite honest, like I don't think it's that important all the time, but it is for my company. Like I think like um, you can get to most companies or a lot of companies and do like a really good job without really being connected to the company's mission. I like firmly believe that. I think like it's a little bit toxic the way that tech works in like, oh, you need to do a lot of side projects in your free time, and you need to like do like programming for fun. I actually I have a firm like personal belief that you shouldn't have to do that to get a job. But I think when you're just starting out, you definitely need to do that. So I think like my advice that I would give to new developers versus like more seasoned developers is different in this arena of like you have to like be passionate about it. So but for Motivo specifically, like um, you have to kind of thrive without a lot of structure. Like I think one thing that I select for, I heard this really good quote on a podcast I listened to. If if you worked at a big company and you liked it, you will not like working at my company. So I think that's a really important point. Is like that structure and like being given a task or project and you just like execute on it. That is not what happens at my company right now. And like maybe as we like get bigger and develop more structure, it will. But for now, it's like you have to deal with a lot of ambiguity and like we're working to fix that, but like we're still kind of in this like messy phase where it's very ambiguous. So you have to care. You have to kind of care about the mission. Like Motivo is pretty mission driven, and you have to be a good person. Those are all things like I look for in a new software development, a new software developer. I like technical skills like pretty important, but honestly, it's not the most important thing. So many interview like processes are geared completely around your technical skill. I think that's like the least important thing out of kind of like picking a software engineer. Like uh, a lot of them are like, do you know what map and reduce do? I don't care. Like why? Like it would take me 5 seconds for me to teach you how what map and reduce do. But like you know what's your process for like developing yourself as an engineer? That's way more important to me than like, do you care about these like trivia questions essentially? So yeah, summing up, those are the kinds of things I look for when I'm hiring.
That we recently had a community member post something similar about this, where a lot of people aren't looking necessarily for the most technical person, but someone that can just talk or just be kind and have conversation is actually so difficult to find. I'm actually watching my partner try to hire at his company, and what he tells me about the people that he interviews, it's kind of shocking. I didn't realize how many people aren't able to hold conversation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I think like a lot of this will never show up on like an objective like so at every company every big company I've been at, there's like kind of an objective way to assess someone, and there's like maybe like even like a score you give them based on this, but like no one ever puts how much you like this person, like how much can you imagine liking working with this person, do you find them agreeable, but like that's always an invisible force, because people are gonna like it's gonna shape the way that you rate them, and kind of the way that yeah, so like make people like you, like that's true throughout your career too, like even at your existing job, if you land a job as a software developer, you want people to like you want people to root for you, and like I think that's a very underrated way of like progressing in your career, and also opens up a lot of options for you later on.
Do you find that to be as equally true at bigger companies?
Yes,
I
for
mean,
sure. Yeah,
obviously it will be for startups because you're working so closely.
yeah.
Uh,
It's still true at bigger companies. There's always a peer review like portion of your performance assessment, and after you leave, these people are your network, right? And so you know, if you burned all your bridges at whatever company you have no network, or like you have to create it from scratch on social media or whatever, that's like way harder than working with someone day in and day out and like getting them to like you over the course of like years.
the next community question, somewhat on the same line, what type of answer do you hope to hear from entry-level software engineers when asked, what are your ambitions? Where do you want to be in 5 years? What's a good
uh,
answer for that?
Yeah, I never asked that question because the answer for like most people is I don't know. I think like it's good to develop a theory about what you want to do, because I think you can know like there are so many directions you can go with tech. You know, you can become a freelancer, you can go into management, you can like become a director at a big company, you can yeah, you can start your own company. You know, you can be an entrepreneur. So I think it's good to have like a theory on what you want to do, and express that, because I think it shows that you're thoughtful about your future and that you have ambition, right? And so that's I think what. I have no idea what people are assessing when they ask this question, but like I think it's like good for me to know. Like I don't know why it's on an interview question. I think it's a great question for me. Like I ask this question a lot during my one-on-ones with my reports, because I actually care about like, oh, uh, how can I like shape your job so that we can work towards this like career goal that you have in the future. But as an interview question, I don't really know. Like I can't get in the head of someone who asks an interview question. But my theory is that like they want to know that like this person has ambitions and knows what they want to do, and that's something you should convince them of. So I would say like have learning goals, like oh, I want to learn the such and such skill, or like well maybe I want to move into management someday, so I want to like learn these people skills, and so like maybe kind of develop a theory around like what do you want to learn as part of this job, and like how could this job help you do that, and the hiring manager will maybe feel like you're engaged with the potential job.
So you're a CTO, a husband, and a dad. Like you have to have such a busy life right now. Why did you decide to start helping people break into tech? Just
Yeah,
adding
my
onto
wife
your list.
my wife asks me this question all the time. Not like why am I doing it, but like the timing. I ask myself this question all the time too. Like I had a lot of years where I wasn't a dad, and I had a lot of time back then to kind of do something like this. And um, I don't know. I've always wanted to like I've always found mentoring people to be the absolute most rewarding part of my career. Like just seeing mentoring someone and seeing that light bulb click when I explain a concept, or like or they just go away and they do a project on their own, and like I love that feeling. And so I wanted to basically see if I could scale it to kind of help more people through writing or being on Twitter or like these kinds of events, things like that. Um, but the timing question is still like it's a little nebulous to me too. I don't know why I chose a time after my son was born to start doing this.
A little of a question for me, and I guess this is helpful for a lot of people getting into tech. Workplace hazards. Many passionate software engineers that I know have trouble taking care of their bodies. They'll get carpal tunnel. They'll have back issues. Have you taken any steps to combat these workplace hazards?
When I'm living my best life, I do. I would say like this year has been pretty chaotic, and I think like adjusting to work from home. I think it always surprises people when engineers say that they think work from home is only okay or they don't like it. I think work from home is okay. Um, there are things I love about it. There are things I don't like about it. So I think like on good days when I have time, I will take a walk and I'll go get a coffee, and that kind of like takes the place of my commute, where my commute used to suck. By the way, it used to be an hour and a half door to door, and it would be a train ride, and it would be like a bike ride, a train ride, and then another bike ride. And I hated that, but I liked the train ride. I liked being on the train and having this space to like meditate. I would read, I would meditate, I would journal, and I had this like dedicated space for me to like examine my day and like think about what kind of day I wanted it to be. Like maybe think about like my previous or like yeah, at the end of the day, I would like look back on my day and think was that a good day? What could I have done differently? And kind of the walking takes the place of that now when I do it, and I notice a huge difference when I just like roll out of bed and sit down at my computer. Those days use are almost never good, right? Like they're usually very thoughtless, and like I never I don't have a sense of gratitude and things like that. Um, and yeah, just like I think beyond that, throughout the day, taking breaks and like just making sure that like I like to wash the dishes in the middle of my day. Like we leave dishes from the night before because our life is chaos. And so I like to take time to wash the dishes in the middle of the day. Like I think I try to time it so when I'm like dealing with like a frustrating development problem, I can do that and it'll like kind of like help me work through the problem a little bit. So breaks like that, I try to work out. I used to work out days a week. I work out like 2 days a week now, maybe at most. So I've tried to do that, but being a parent is makes it very difficult to do any of the self care stuff.
Yeah, I would say taking care of a child is a workout in itself.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
interesting though. I've never usually when I hear answers to that question, it's more about like ergonomic chairs or something similar, standing desks. It's nice to think about just taking an hour before and after your workday to process, prepare for the day and process after the day. So I
yeah.
think that's a really good suggestion.
Yeah. Also, get a nice chair. Like
Oh,
if you don't have a standing desk, make sure you get a nice chair. You're sitting in it uh, a lot. I think like all the ergonomic advice around like spending good money on the things that separate you from the ground. So like car tires, chairs, and beds. I think are like the things that you want to splurge on.
do you have any brands that you would recommend?
The one I'm sitting in is Herman Miller Aeron chair. So don't buy it new. I think it's like a lot of money. I got a used one. This one's like $300. So definitely recommend this. And like I think gaming chairs are pretty good too. So anything where the manufacturer expects the person to be sitting in it for like several hours a day.
And then now that we have a couple minutes before we start wrapping up, I just want to let everyone know that they can ask questions in chat if they thought of any during this talk. So we'll give them a couple seconds to ask another question before we start wrapping up. So I'm going to read Cole's question out loud for everyone. Cole says, I'm trans and LinkedIn is a really difficult situation for me at this moment in time. Unfortunately, it is usually the main or sole focus of every hiring advice event I attend. It can be super defeating. As a CTO, what are other ways that candidates have brought themselves into your awareness? So I guess outside of using LinkedIn.
Interesting. It's a good question. I have never had a candidate approach me not through LinkedIn. So yeah, it's hard for me to give advice here. Like we also post our job postings. Unfortunately they're on LinkedIn, but we also cross post to Indeed. And like I think I'm not sure exactly kind of the nature of the problem you're dealing with on LinkedIn. Maybe Indeed could be a better source because it's less of a social network. Um, but my email is on every job posting I put out, and people are free to email me in response. So this is like also a piece of advice. Like even if you one click apply, it does you a lot of favors to also email the person. Um, and I'm sorry you're going through this, Cole. Like I think that that sounds really really difficult, and I'm not sure exactly what like I said, I'm not sure exactly what the struggle is with LinkedIn in particular. But yeah, I mean, I read every email that I get, so Motivo's still small enough that I can do that, and yeah, so email I think is like totally fine to reach out. Like the worst that will happen is they'll ignore you, but I don't ignore people, so yeah.
Out of curiosity, how do you feel about people reaching out to you over Twitter and asking to maybe set up a meeting with you to just even talk about Motivo and your positions?
I am open to that when we have an open position. But we don't often have an open position just because like it's still pretty early in my company's journey. So if we were like hitting hypergrowth stage, I would just be essentially on Twitter all the time hiring. But I don't have we don't have a lot of openings right now.
Do you think that's a good way for people to reach out to companies that they're interested in if they don't feel like LinkedIn is a good option for them?
I personally am really loving Twitter. I'm very new to Twitter, and I also want to be clear that my perspective is limited with Twitter. Like I am not all companies, and I constantly say this is like I give advice of like what it would look like for you to be a good candidate for Motivo, and in my experience like with these like FANG companies and like other startups I've been at, but I am not all companies. Like, and I think like there's a whole slice of companies that I have no experience with. Like I've talked about this before, like a Bank of America or like a Chase or like a Comcast, like these huge companies that like I think don't even care about their tech. Is like I don't have any experience with them, but there's a lot of jobs there. So I also want to be clear that like that's the case for me. But like I love watching people build on Twitter. I love watching them learn. It convinces me that they're passionate, and it's a pretty big like I'm gonna imagine that's gonna be a pretty big hiring channel as for me in particular as Motivo gets bigger.
Seems
Yeah,
like Joshua has,
Josh has
yeah,
some good feedback here. Yeah.
found some success in Twitter. That's awesome to hear. I think Spaces has really taken off on tech Twitter.
Yep.
The next question would be, what's been your favorite project to work on in your career, either due to impact, team, languages learned?
Ooh, this is a great question. Um, I think my favorite project was at Google, and it was for my team. Basically, does all of Google's website. Like my team, it was called Brand Studio, or like I worked very, very closely with this team called Brand Studio, and they maintained all of Google's marketing sites essentially, all like everything that's like a landing page or anything like that for all their products. Basically, went through this team, and we had this like horrible infrastructure that was like an in-web browser IDE. And like all your files would appear in the browser, and like you couldn't run like VS Code on it, or you couldn't run Git on it. Like there's a lot of advantages to having your files on your computer, and using whatever tools you choose. And so we were kind of like locked into whatever tools were in this like in browser editor, and all the source control was done in there, and all the editing was done in there, and everyone hated it. It was like universally reviled. And my biggest project there was to turn that into a local running project that would sync through the files that you needed, build a dependency tree based on like all the files that those files required, and download them all to your computer. And then you could run Git, you could run your own editor on them, and it was like a pretty huge accomplishment in my opinion. And like lots of there were tons of like web developers that got that had a better development experience because of that.
And I'm going to try to get this last one or two questions in. what are the qualities that the best engineers you have worked with share?
Yeah, I think it's kind of what we were talking about before with like giving giving a crap. Like I think like that if I had to sum it all up into that one quality is like they care. They care about like their code quality, they care about improving, they care about like getting faster, and they care about like the company's like they care about like what they're doing at the company, the impact that they're making in the world. I would say like universally that's been the case for me if I had to sum it all up.
All right, last question is Lorraine says, I noticed you also write and that many other tech folks do as well. What writing advice do you have for people who want to break into tech? How important would you say is writing slash keeping a blog?
I would say it's very good. It's like very, very good to have it. It's far from a must. You can certainly land jobs without doing it, but I love reading technical blogs of like people who are applying to my jobs, because it shows me that you want to teach other people. You're going to be a great mentor someday. It shows me that if you can teach a topic and you can explain it well, um, you will be a good engineer. Like if you can explain, like it means that you understand that topic. And I think like also one other thing is like you're not afraid to kind of be wrong. Like you're not afraid to kind of like be public about something you think you know. And like I think if I can see the way that you respond to feedback and like iterate on your blog, if people like correct you or whatever, if I correct you, if I like email you and like oh, I noticed this thing on your blog, what do you think of this? Like if you receive that feedback, that's another really good signal. So it gives me a lot of these like invisible signals I had to get through an interview. um, so it's a huge bonus. Not It's far from a must, like I said, but if you have the time and energy for it, I would definitely recommend it.
All right. Well, it's almost the end of the hour. I could probably sit here and prod your brain for a lot longer, but I'm very happy that you chose to participate into the Breaking into Tech AMA. I think learning about your journey has been really helpful for me, and I think it will be really helpful for all the software engineers that are trying to break into tech or starting their own journey. We're going to allow people to ask follow-up questions in the Slack uh, Monday and Tuesday of next week. Um, if you are not in the Bit Slack, we are going to post the link to that. Um, if Lizzie will do that here in the chat, we'll also do it in the description on YouTube if anyone's watching from YouTube right now. Mike, do you have any parting words or anything you want viewers to check out? Socials you want to share?
Sure. I stream a live stream of me coding front end interview challenges every Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. So feel free to check me out there. Like it's a pretty new stream, but my friend and I just run through some questions and I live code it. I felt like that was a good way for people to kind of see like how a senior engineer thinks about doing interviews. You can find me on sorry, that's twitch.tv/generic Mike Chen. And Lizzie just linked my Twitter as well. So feel free to reach out to me on Twitter if you have any questions. I'm always happy to hear from anyone who's comfortable reaching out. And my last thing is the questions I do on the Twitch stream come from a website I'm building called frontendeval.com. And those are just questions that you can practice for front end interviews on. So feel free to check any of those out and send me a DM if you want to know more.
Awesome. And that concludes the AMA. Thank you again to Mike, and thank you to anyone watching. So
Thank
bye.
you. Thank you.